Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. Yes, I'll just start with a small introduction, introducing myself. A little bit already been done, but anyway, the KB, and then this weird subtitle about pyramids was something I came up with 2 months ago, and then last week I had to prepare for the lecture, and then I said, what do I have to do with the pyramids? Anyway, about me, so it has already been said, I'm a philologist and book historian, curator of digital collections at the KB in the Netherlands. I'm Belgian myself, but I work in the Netherlands. I'm also chair of the European Research Community Steering Group, and I've been very active lately with the data sheets for Digital Cultural Heritage Working Group, and that will come back later on. And if you want to reach out, this is my email and X and Mastodon handle. About the KB, the National Library of the Netherlands. So we collect Dutch publications on paper, but also born digital, try to collect everything that is being published in the Netherlands. Apart from that, we also want to digitize, or try to digitize, which means scanning and text recognition, all printed materials, and provide access as fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and open as possible. And then the pyramids, okay, the one on the left, that's the one where it all started now. That I'll explain later, but what I will do is give you an overview of what we did at the KB to engage researchers with collections, with our collections as data, and that pyramid has been quite instrumental for that. And on the right are the pyramids I'll come back to in the end. Those are the ones I will use to have a few reflections on what I've been telling you. But first, before we can jump to the collections as data, first a short, brief introduction, full-scale digitization at the KB. So you have some sort of idea of what I'm talking about and where I come from and where the KB is at the moment. We started digitizing this century, basically, and say that we had two major phases. The first phase was really the big project phase. So it started with very early experiments called the Roaring Twenties and Oorlog en Revolutie, War and Revolution, which is really trying to see, is it possible to mass digitize historical newspapers? Is OCR good enough? Can we make it searchable, etc., etc. And then after the answers were yes, it is possible, we started with a bigger project. So the parliamentary papers have been digitized. We got a very big project starting in 2006 for historical newspapers ranging from 1618 until 1995. One project for books, early modern books, one project for periodicals, so magazines and journals, not newspapers, etc., etc., etc. And then by the end of the first decade, we took a somewhat controversial decision and also collaborated with Procrest and Google Books for the older books. Those projects have all been finished by now, so and I wanted to give you one example, since this is a summer school where newspapers are central. I thought it would be a good idea to give you one insight into one of those bigger projects. So the newspaper project, the DDD, Database of Digital Daily Newspapers, which ran from 2006 to 2012. 12.5 million euros, 1 million historical Dutch newspapers. We had an advisory commission consisting of academics and journalists. They did a selection of the newspapers that should be digitized, taking into account press historical relevance, geographical, political, religious significance, etc., etc. And we had optical character recognition on the one hand and optical layout recognition on the other hand, so segmentation of all the articles. I see somebody nodding who was this afternoon explaining what OLR is, so that's what we had already in place more than 10 years ago. If you want to learn more about this, I think, especially in English, a good resource still is the Atlas of Historical Newspapers. I put the URL on the slide. There is also a page there, or a chapter there on the historical newspapers we have. We publish them on Delphi. I'll come back to that a little later. The interesting thing about the project is that and this is still how we work, we do not only digitize collections that we have at a library, but also we try to really build a national corpus of newspapers, of Dutch newspapers, of Dutch periodicals. So what we do, we digitize collections that are in our own library, but also in different archives and libraries all over the country, and even outside of the Netherlands. So for instance, this is a scan of the first or the earliest newspaper that has been printed in the Netherlands, also in Dutch in 1618. There's only one surviving copy. That copy is in the KB in Sweden, so in the National Library in Sweden. So our colleagues in Sweden send us a scan of this newspaper, and now it's part of our collection of digitized newspapers. The unavoidable slide on copyright. Very briefly, metadata CC0, so that can be used by anyone for any purpose. Out of copyright material, we put a public domain mark on that. That's still easy, and then comes the complicated part. All of the newspapers, or even also books, periodicals, etc., that could be in copyright, potentially in copyright, is of course difficult, that's what we all know, but we have been in a very lucky situation in the Netherlands that already during, by the end of this project where we digitized the newspapers, we have been able to negotiate agreements with so-called collective management organizations and with publishers. Those collective management organizations represent the creators and the writers of the newspapers, and the publishers, of course, represent those also creators. But once you have agreements with both CMOs and the publishers, that gives us the opportunity to publish those historical newspapers, even if they are potentially in copyright, online. And also give a copy to researchers for research purposes. And that's, of course, when collections as data comes in. And the very interesting thing is that our colleagues, I was not involved at that point, have been able to negotiate this up until 1995. So by 2010, we could already publish historical newspapers up until 1995 online and give access to researchers. And the very good news is that very recently my colleagues have renegotiated the contracts with the CMOs, and now, starting hopefully the 1st of January next year, we will be able to publish newspapers with a moving wall up until 10 years ago. So that would mean that we could publish up until 2014, next year 2015, etc. And that is for all kind of periodicals, so newspapers, magazines, journals, etc. Keep in mind, though, that we still need agreements with the publishers too. So that's a complication, but will be really interesting, I hope. So, like I said, first phase, second phase. So the second phase was really digitization as channel operations at the KB, overseen in the Netherlands by the national program called Metamorphose, which is a program for preservation of paper heritage. And we just recently finished writing our new digitization strategy, having in mind that we have this new agreement with CMOs making it possible to publish up until 10 years ago. No surprise there, we will focus primarily for the next few years on the second half of 20th century. This will also make it clear, this is taken from a policy 2 or 3 years ago, trying to get some sort of estimate of the number of publications that we have digitized so far. It is quite complicated and is very unclear what these numbers really say, because this is, as far as I know, the number of digitized items and the number of surviving items in Dutch institutions, so not even the number of copies that publications that have been there. But anyway, it gives you an indication. And as you can see, up until 1900, the idea is that we should have about 80 to 90% of what can be digitized already in a digital format. 20th century, first half, quite okay, second half, disaster. And that's what hopefully we'll be able to change in the coming years. Okay, and then there's also a small history of how we put those collections online. And this is really similar to the different phases where we how we digitize the collections. So again, the first phase with every project having its own website, and a website means a search interface. So for the parliamentary papers, there was a website. For the newspapers, we launched a website in 2010. The books had their own website in 2011. Periodicals, etc., etc. ProQuest and Google Books were on ProQuest and Google Books. All of that more or less changed by 2013 when we launched Delphi. Is that familiar to some people? I see some people nodding. It's really it has turned into the national portal in the Netherlands where we publish digitized historical publications, and which also means that all of those search interfaces that you can see there in red are no longer there. It's now all of it on delphi.nl. Just to give you an illustration, this was 2010, the newspapers. This was 2011, I think, early Dutch books online. These were the periodicals. Now we have Delphi, and that is what it looks like still today, more or less. The Delphi team is working on a completely new interface, but that will be for, I think, next year, maybe even the year after. Okay, the main thing now, KB's digitized collections as data. I assume that all of you are familiar with the collections as data concept, more or less. Very, very briefly, started as a project in the US by Thomas Padilla and his partners in crime, and is turning slowly and gradually into European, US global movement, where we try to give access to GLAM collections as data in a responsible way, think about that, reflect on that, etc. At the KB, we launched a service, and you could call it some kind of proto collections as data in 2012, and we called it data services, and this was really aiming at researchers who were interested in having access to the whole collections, what we now call collections as data. And now the first pyramid. Around that time, we had a policy at the KB, and in that policy, it tried to distinguish the different patrons we were trying to serve. And the interesting thing was that on the top of that pyramid, it said digital humanities scholars, 300 plus, part of 10,000 humanities scholars in the Netherlands, and that, including with what is in the policy itself, saying the KB actively supports this form of humanities called digital humanities. It's a relatively small but growing group, etc., etc. Around that time, we had a small group within the KB, the digital humanities team, nowadays digital scholarship team, people from the R&D department, people from the collections department. This was our ticket to doing whatever we wanted, whatever we thought interesting for digital humanities scholars, and gave us really a free ticket. And and we did not have to ask permission to do most of the things I will show you now. So what we did, we really started really simple, almost grassroots, you could say. Had this kind of posters, for instance, about the data set we had at the National Library, to go to conferences. And it's an interesting thing here to show you too, is that already at that point, we had APIs in place, an OAI API, an SRU API, which meant that starting data services at the KB was really quite simple. The only thing we had to do is have a few manuals, and the data sets were available. So we had those manuals, and we went on tour to conferences where researchers gather and talk. You know that. Gave some presentations at DH conferences, guest lectures, etc., etc. You see a few more posters there. You can see me there 10 years ago without any grey hair. And then step 2 was 2 years later, 2014. The idea was launched by my then colleague. Nowadays he's working at Berlin State Library, Claeyssens. I suppose most of you know him. At that point he was working at the KB, and he had a plan that was inspired by the British Library, to be honest, but to launch a lab, a place where we could collaborate and where we could experiment, mostly online. So in 2014 this page was launched, hacked together by Claeyssens himself. 3 years later we replaced it with this one, so a place where we could publish the results of collaborations with researchers, data sets, tools we develop, a blog, etc., etc. Sorry, news and events. We had our own slogan. We were open, we would experiment, we connect, we learn. Big words. And then we took the next step, and that was the most important one, I think. That's where we really invited researchers in. There was already a fellowship program at the KB, but that was aiming at senior academics from outside of the Netherlands. We changed it a little to senior academics within the Netherlands, but who were interested in computational and digital humanities. So we invited those in, and we started a research in residence program, again inspired by colleagues at the British Library, which was really aiming at early career researchers. They could come and work with us for half a year, together with a research software engineer, together with a curator, together with an advisor in digital scholarship, etc., etc. And then, of course, all the tools or the derived data sets were published on our lab. By 2014, there were the first plans in the Netherlands to organize a big digital humanities conference. We became the co-organizers, again a way to invite researchers into the library. And then by 2015 and 2017, we've organized our own historical newspapers as big data conferences, which both of them attracted about 200 people, I think, which was really great. Yesterday I received a message that the ONB is organizing a conference with almost the same title, I believe, newspapers as data sets. Really sounded familiar. Okay, so one example of how that worked. They have already been mentioned this afternoon, so people who were here during the summer school. At some point there were 2 Dutch researchers mentioned, Thomas Smits and Melvin Wevers. Well, in 2017 there were 2 young PhD researchers who arrived as researchers in residence at the KB. They're the 2 young men in the middle, the one on the left and on the right are research software engineers of the KB. The people in the middle are Melvin and Thomas. At that time, we saw a rise of something really, really interesting and something new called computer vision. And that's what we were interested in. They had little experience with that. We had little experience with that, but that was just the idea of this program, the research in residence program, so we could collaborate and discover how that works together. And in Delft, so the way we digitize our newspapers, we have the OCR, and we have, of course, the OLR, the layout recognition. With the layout recognition also comes some sort of categorization. So on the left, you can see 4 categories we have. Those are the categories within the newspaper. So it is the illustration with caption. So all of the illustrations with captions are segmented and easily extracted. And we have the advertisements. again segmented and thus quite easy to extract. Thomas was interested in the illustrations. He had a really basic question. Can we empirically decide or find out at what point in history or in time do we see the switch from other kind of illustrations to photographs in the Dutch newspapers? So it's really counting. But then you have to count, know what you count. Photographs, other illustrations. Can computer vision help? And Melvin was really interested at that time in advertisements and how the images being used in advertisements. Anyway, we took our first test with neural networks, all new to us at that time, and quite easily the software found the maps and the chessboards and buildings being destroyed and more and more and more. So Thomas had his answer, 1927. That was the point when we got the switch in Dutch newspapers from other kinds of illustrations to photographs. And from Melvin, we created this demo. I think we saw something quite similar this afternoon, where you can search nearest neighbors kind of images, in this case advertisements in Dutch newspapers. And that was the start for 2 young PhD students, nowadays both of them assistant professors in Amsterdam, and making a hobby of publishing articles where they announce a new turn. So they have had the visual digital turn in historical research, and 1 year or 2 years ago, the multimodal turn in digital humanities. So still working on this, but it all started in this collaboration within the KB. And well, like that, we had a few more researchers. This is not a complete list, but this, as you can see, creating a very interesting network for the KB. Most of those people we are still in touch with. And that was the main question, of course, of my lecture. In 2018, we had a guest from Switzerland working in Zürich. I don't know if some of you know Michael Gasse. He was with us for a few weeks, and what he did, he interviewed most of those former researchers in residence at that point and most of the former fellows to find out, does this program work? Yes, it does. Major impact on their research. Some researchers really catapulted into DH, shaped future research. Digital source criticism became a new focal point. Positive impact on the career, better understanding of the KB, of the library, were very important. And of course, on the other hand, for us, a better understanding of our own digital collections, what you can do with it, insight into research process, new tools, new techniques. We have a whole bunch of new ambassadors for the KB and its collections, a growing academic network, and also very interesting follow-up projects. Some of those researchers come back with a new project or with a consortium of researchers, and where we get involved and are part of the project. Small, big. Over here you see some of those projects. The big one, of course, is on top, which is Claria. I think in Austria they also have this combination of Daria and Clarin. This is Claria, the big Dutch national infrastructure. And of course, what researchers prefer to do and what we hope they do. Some more papers being published, and as you can see, it's really broad range. There are ecologists who have been working with our newspapers. You can see urban history, weather forecasts, history of science, etc. So all of these papers have been based on research using our historical newspapers as data. And then there was something we did not really expect, and that is some of those researchers started to build things themselves and even put it online. So this is the earliest example. It was a computer scientist. We were familiar with the Google Ngram viewer at that point, but he gave us an Ngram viewer on top of our newspapers. and we published that on the lab, of course. And in the end, even implemented this into Delphi. So there is now in Delphi some sort of n-gram viewer where you can plot the results of your search results over time. The inspiration was basically given to us by a researcher. Then we have the linguists. Linguists started to parse and part of speech tag and do the whole NLP magic with our collection. So there is now online this Nederlab.nl where quite a few of our collections have been NLP'd. Access is restricted to researchers because of the whole copyright thing. At Utrecht University, the Digital Humanities Lab built this search interface where they wanted to try to compare not only the Dutch historical newspapers, but also newspapers and even other publications from outside of the Netherlands. And that is, of course, something you're all aware of. For us, it's an international project, of course, the Impresso project. We're also into the Impresso Doppio, and there will be more Dutch newspapers in there. All of that research also find its way into the national news. This is taken from a national newspaper based on our collections. This was stylometry software that has been used to find out who was the real author of the national anthem of the Netherlands, because that's unknown. There was a primary candidate. So we gave the full, all of the text we had from that author, Marnix van Sint-Alderhonde, a few others, and the control group, also the whole oeuvre of those writers. In the end, it turned out that according to the stylometry software, the most plausible author came from the control group. So now we have a new primary suspect of who wrote the national anthem of the Netherlands. And then fast forward only 2 years ago, we have, of course, the AI. This is a language model being built, a historical Dutch language model on top of mostly publications we have been digitizing. So, main lesson up until now for us, collaboration with researchers and sharing of everything we know has worked very well, and we still plan to do that. We still have the research and residence program is still there. We're still involved in projects, etc., etc. But of course, we've also learned a few things. Put it very simply, an API is not enough. There are lots of researchers out there, and all of them have different wishes, all of them have different skills. Those skills can change over time, depending on whether they're a computer scientist or a historian or whatever. Strangely enough, we still lack an overview of the various data sets we have, and that's something that we should fix. And we're still a big question, access to born digital in copyright material, so material that we cannot have any CMO agreement or publisher agreement. Apart from that, we've also commissioned a report really asking, should we invest time in developing a text suite? So a GUI, more than search interface, really an interface where we can search, for instance, historical newspapers, but implementing all the text mining, data mining, NLP software and algorithms. Surprisingly, the answer, according to this report, was no. Most researchers are not interested in that, or not really waiting in that. What they would like to have is some kind of corpus selection tool, and there you can, of course, still use those algorithms, but to in a more sophisticated way, build your own corpus, extract it from the different collections we have, depending on your own research question. If you want to have a look at it, it's more complicated than that, but the report is on Zenodo. overview of what we are doing now, new developments and future developments. And as you can see, we launched the data lab. We did not finish the cake entirely. So we're building a data registry, structured and semi-structured information on the different collections we have and how they are available to whom, etc. So they can also feed into the national and international registries. In the Netherlands, there's a fair data registry for research data sets. We have a digital heritage registry, so we can feed into all of those. And then, of course, things like the SSH marketplace on European level. We want to build a corpus builder. We believe the report is right, and that could be really a next step to engage researchers, to help researchers. But unfortunately, it's been put on hold. So the library has decided to prioritize a few other projects, and we don't know for how long it will be on hold. We still hope we'll be able to build that in a few years. Early this year, we launched an on-site lab. We already had the online lab for 10 years. Now we have the KB data lab. Focus there is to give access to the in-copyright materials that really cannot leave the building. There's no internet connection in the lab. So this is really for only for researchers, only for research purposes. And then we make sure the data is available. We make sure that software is there, and then they invite them in, supervised, etc. And we have some small museum there, as you can see on the right. We're also experimenting, and there's already a proof of concept has been built together with a few other organizations and institutes to have some kind of safe virtual research environment. So the idea there is to bring the tools to the data instead of the data to the tools or to the researcher. So you could run your algorithm without seeing the publications themselves. This has been inspired by HathiTrust, by the way. They have this the notion of non-consumptive reading, and this already works, but yeah, it still has to mature a little. And then you're familiar with the concept. 2 months ago, we took a new step in really inviting researchers in, so from the senior academics for the fellows to the early career and now to the research masters and PhD students. We had a group of 20 people for one whole week in the library, introducing them to the collections. It's not a digital humanities summer school, it's a digital collections summer school. Okay, now to end, to conclude, I should say, 4 reflections, you could say, and of course with 3 pyramids. First one, along the way we more or less consciously decided that in the library we want to keep focusing on publications. So if you have this information pyramid, you could say that the bottom layer. So that means we won't, for now, have something like Nederlab, where we have all of the NLP run on top of the text. We won't host something like that. What we do is we have the publications, we have the data, we have the OCR. That's what we put online, if possible, and give access to. That's what we make sure that will be preserved for the coming years, for coming decades, etc. But we focus on that. That's one thing. Second one is more or less an observation, inspired by this meme from Ryan Cordell, which I really love. Maybe I should be quiet for half a minute so you could read it. I think it's completely right. And for me, the conclusion in a way is that we as libraries have become publishers, and I think that is quite an important conclusion, which means that all of those digitized collections, we should not consider them to be surrogates. There are new publications, there aren't just new editions, and that's how we should treat them also within the library, so for digital preservation purposes. We should preserve them as new publications. It's also an incentive to start working on digital bibliography, something like that. And I think that should be something being done by both librarians and researchers. Not sure what it would look like. And as you know, a lot of librarians have some, do not really agree with how some publishers publish, let's say, scientific and scholarly research. We prefer it to be open, we prefer to publish it fair. If we are publishers ourselves, maybe we should give the example as librarians and publish it as open as possible, as fair as possible. So that are some of the implications as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, this is what I call the ziggurat problem, or the ziggurat issue. So a ziggurat is also some kind of pyramid, a very early Mesopotamian one. And as far as I know, most of them look like this. They're hidden in the desert. They have a few layers and a lot of sand over there. And for me, this works quite well as a metaphor of what those digitized collections look like. We have the top layer of the digitized collection, but we've got no idea which part, how this, the second layer, I should say, is then what is being preserved in mostly public institutions, and that also is a part of what has been published over the centuries. So we have no idea in the end what this collection of digital publication really is, what is in there, what is not in there, because we don't know which part has been digital, which part did survive, which part has been published. I messed it up a little. I hope you understand what I'm trying to explain. So it's about source criticism in the end. Yes. And then the last pyramid, this is taken from a paper by Bob Nicholson. It's really, this is in a way a visualization of showing the whole revolution within research, going from paper publications to digitized with OCR publications. So we no longer search for a title and then an issue and then a header and then we look into the article. No, nowadays we start from here, we have keyword search. So now we can search all of that. Problem is, and this is just a small example, but there are algorithms in play here, and most of us are not really familiar with how those algorithms work, how relevance works, etc., etc. And that is just for a really simple search interface. You can imagine if we're talking text mining and data mining, and next step, of course, AI, Gen AI. This is the whole question of tool criticism, the whole question of black boxes, and that we should open up together, probably researchers, GLAM people, etc. And so this is also the bridge to my epilogue, the AI and GLAM. Of course, at the KB, we've been experimenting, like most libraries, with Gen AI. This is the curator bot. It's an experiment, but you can ask the curator bot all kinds of questions about this one manuscript. This is something we developed together with colleagues from the Technical University in Delft. Works really well. Interesting thing is you can ask it questions in dozens of languages, and we did not have to do anything to have this result. So this is this first step towards asking, from keyword searching towards asking questions. We have a colleague also experimenting with a bigger collection, see if we can ask questions at that collection instead of searching that collection. We're collaborating with other researchers to develop, to use AI to have metadata associated to publications, etc., etc., etc. thing for me is the most important thing, and for me, when looking to these observations I just had, is that I believe that what this whole new Gen AI revolution is doing is really amplifying a lot of those problems related to source criticism and tool criticism. And I still think, and that's, as you've noticed, the line of my whole lecture, this is something we should tackle together, people from GLAM institutes and researchers. And I've been, like I said, really active in one working group within the European ecosystem, where we exactly try to do that. A group of researchers and people working in libraries have been thinking about how we should write down all of the information we have on a collection, and inspired by the concept of data sheets by Tim Gebru and others. So about positionality, possible bias you're aware of, etc. So the idea is that if you publish a data set, please make sure that it be accompanied by all of this kind of information. It shouldn't be, well, I would love if you created data sheets like this, but in the end it's about the information that should be there. Because in the end, we can all use AI, but in the end, AI can also use some humanities, some culture, some GLAM. Thank you.